So, this could easily turn into ponage, but I think at least at first I'm going to try to actually answer VenomfangX's questions genuinely. But if it gets too chowder-headed, well, open season? Yeah, lock and load.
Hey guys, I'd like to show you some of my paintings.
Yeah, I'm an artist too. Read my webcomic. Link in the crotch bar.
I took a course this year called The Philosophy of Science. And what we did was we asked the question, what is science? And in endeavoring to answer this question, we noticed that this was indeed a philosophical question, not a scientific one.
Well, that at least is true enough. Sure. Okay, go on.
And so what this course cautioned us was that before you even begin to do science, you better have a good working definition of what science is and what it endeavors to do, what it can do and what it can't do. Because if you don't, you can fall into the camp of what's called scientism.
Well, I'm looking at the Wikipedia entry for scientism, and there are actually multiple definitions of it, but I see the one you're using, so for now at least I'll run with it. But I will say at the outset that I don't think people are doing what you think they're doing when they debunk religious arguments. But let's move on, and I'll get to that as you get to it.
It's the belief, the epistemological belief, that the only way to know things is science.
Okay, is science the only way to know everything? Well, no. I mean, I can tell you what emotion I'm feeling without having to perform science. I just experience it in a subjective way. But by the same token, science could objectively tell you what emotion I'm feeling by examining my brain, my limbic system, my adrenal glands, all of that stuff. So in that way, emotions are just as objective as, say, finding an object, picking up a ball or something. Now, if you want to talk about, say, for example, the presence of God, well, the only way for us to experience God is through our senses. And so if there is a deity out there somewhere, he, she, it, or they is going to have to manipulate us, our body chemistry, or something like that. Or heck, manifesting physically, externally, in an objective way. Because if a deity didn't do that, we'd never know it was there.
I'm going to argue that science only deals in quantity, and it completely is blind to quality.
Well, I'm afraid I'm going to have to call BS on that one. I'm looking at the dictionary definition of quality right now. The very first definition, an essential or distinctive characteristic, property, or attribute. Example, the chemical qualities of alcohol. This is on dictionary.reference.com, and it says here that the source for this is the Random House Dictionary 2010. So I'd say that science is very deeply concerned with quality.
I'm going to argue that this painting has certain qualities that are undetectable to science, which only deals in quantity. Now, quantity, things we can test, repeat, demonstrate, measure, we can measure this.
Maybe I'm being a little pedantic over here, but it sure seems to me that we can measure the quality of something. I mean, if something's hot, cold, old, new, wet, dry, any of those things, it sure does seem to me as if those are qualities, and we can measure them using science. No, we can't necessarily use science to measure how we feel about those traits, about those qualities of something, and it sure does seem as if you're arguing about feelings rather than characteristics. But still, I think it's an important distinction to make.
So what qualities are in this painting that are undetectable to science? Well, let's pretend for a moment that my DNA was not on here. I mean, I've been touching it, so there probably is some of my DNA, but if there wasn't, if there was no DNA on this painting, and if my signature was not at the bottom, and if you only had the painting, there is nothing in the painting itself that points to me as its author.
Our lacking of evidence doesn't change the facts. The fact is that you painted that painting, and science could detect that if it had adequate evidence. So the fault is not with science, but rather with our ability to collect enough data.
There is no scientific experiment that would spit out the name Sean when you tested this thing.
Actually, that's not entirely true. Okay, maybe there isn't something directly on the painting that could tell us, but if we were to investigate as far as we possibly could, tested every person who was ever within the vicinity of that paper, tested the chemical composition of the paint on the painting, and then tested every available source of paint we had nearby, well, eventually we could start eliminating enough possibilities that we'd probably figure out it was you. It may not say Sean or VenomfangX directly, but we could still figure it out if we had enough time and ability to investigate. I mean, it's an empirical objective object. We could figure it out, potentially.
Here's another quality that this has. I painted this with a purpose in mind. The flower represented me when I was in high school, and the spider webs represented I felt stuck in a situation that I couldn't get out of. Now, you couldn't have known that unless I told you.
Ah, but there's more than one way for you to tell us. You don't necessarily have to tell us verbally. I mean, if we had access to your head meats, there's a very real chance that with, I don't know, surgery and advanced equipment, we could extract your brain and find the information without you ever saying it. Granted, we don't have that technology yet, and it's possible that the very act of trying to cut up your brain to get that information would fail. But at the same time, there's the potential for us to find that out using science. So, again, this quality that you're saying cannot be detected by science, it can. Maybe not directly, but the possibility does, in fact, exist.
There is no way that this painting itself contains that information that I just relayed to you. That's a quality that this has that's in the mind of its creator and not found using the scientific method.
All right, well, let me get just a little bit pedantic then. That painting does not have that quality. It's your opinion that the painting has that quality. Someone else looking at the painting could feel something entirely different. And that is not necessarily wrong. There is nothing inherent in that painting that someone should feel a certain way about it. Not a damn thing. Doesn't matter that you created it. Doesn't. What matters is the person experiencing it.
But my intention has been translated onto this page, and it continues to contain that quality such that I can say, my purpose is achieved in this.
Well, you can say whatever the heck you like, but that doesn't make it necessarily the truth. Doesn't make it reality. Your intention is not actually there. It's only in your own head.
Here's another quality that this has. This is a flower, and these are spider webs, but that's not actually a flower. Doesn't smell like a flower at all. And those aren't actually spider webs. They weren't made by a spider. Now, you couldn't do a scientific experiment to discover the flowerness or the spiderwebness about this because there's actually nothing to do with a flower or spiderweb in the paint.
What, did you switch from Kent Hovind and Ray Comfort to Deepak Chopra now? There is nothing there that's a flower-ness, that's a web-ness. We see them as representations because we are pattern-seeking animals. That's a quality we possess that's a function of our brains. But there is nothing flowerish about that blot of ink on that painting, on that paper, besides what we imbue it with in our minds. And it stays in our minds. It's a subjective feeling. No, there's nothing objective that makes that a flower or a web. It's entirely in our own heads.
What does this have to do with anything?
Oh, the jokes I'm holding back right now.
What happens if we approach the world looking for the Creator?
Well, you've already gotten it wrong. You shouldn't be looking for a creator. That's not what you should be doing at all. That's putting the cart before the horse. That's putting the conclusion before the evidence. What you should be doing is gathering evidence and then seeing where that evidence leads, rather than starting with your conclusion and trying to justify it from what you see.
Christians believe that marriage, one man and one woman, actually represent Jesus and his church coming together in a holy union, in a covenant relationship.
Don't know where the heck the marriage argument came from, completely out of the blue, but again, you're free to think that all you like. Doesn't make it true.
Well, that's not something that science can actually quantifiably prove. It's not demonstratable.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of things that are completely made up and entirely the product of emotion that aren't provable either. What's your point?
What if there's a purpose for the entire universe?
Purpose implies intention. Intention implies opinion. Opinions are subjective. So even if there was a purpose to the universe, even if, and I don't buy this for a second, but even if there was a God and that God intended the universe for something specific, well, guess what? That's just God's opinion. And I don't see any reason why I should bow to it any more than I should bow to my parents' opinion because they created me. And of course I'm also adopted, but let's leave that out. The point being that I'm an intelligent being. Presumably you are too. We're allowed to have our own intentions, our own opinions. We can do with our lives as we wish. So even if someone somewhere had an intention for the universe once upon a time, well, that intention can change. That purpose for the universe can change based on other people's opinions, or heck, if that God existed, and again I don't buy it, he, she, it, or they could change their mind. So, I'm sorry, but again, you're acting like a purpose to the universe is a fact, and it's immutable, and it's really not.
Well, before we even begin our scientific endeavors, we should already know that science can't detect those things, but we should also know that just because science can't detect them does not mean they're not there.
Well, I've already explained how in some cases science could detect them, and in other cases they're not actually there, but rather products of our own opinion. But let's just move on.
I believe, as many Christians and all Christians believe, that human life has a certain value, a quality above that of the animals.
Well, you can believe that. Doesn't make it a fact. And let's talk about what the heck above even means.
Now, you could weigh the animals and look at their biology and say, well, they look very similar, so I guess human beings have no more value than that of an animal, which is why when Ray Comfort asked Thunderfoot if he'd rather save his dog or his rotten neighbor, he said,
his dog. Yeah, we know. But that's more a lesson about his neighbor not being a jerk, as opposed to the inherent value of a human versus some other animal. And humans are animals, let's not forget. Look up your place in taxonomy, pal.
Because Thunderfoot can't detect by way of science the value of a human life over that of an animal.
Has any part of you ever suspected even the tiniest bit that maybe that value isn't actually there, but rather just your opinion? Because if not, you haven't thought this through. How do you show that humans have more value? Not why do you feel, how do you show? How can you know it?
What if the universe has a creator? What if there is a purpose or a design? Science can't detect it.
Wrong. Your own book, your own Christian legends claim that your God, the creator of this universe, has shown the heck up once or twice. You know, done things, bolts from the blue to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, turning people into pillars of salt, flooding the earth. All kinds of stuff that frankly science could detect and should be able to trace back to its source with enough data. So, if your God does in fact exist, either he can be detected by science because all of the crap he's done, or he's never done anything that we could detect and is therefore completely irrelevant. Pick one.
That does not mean we should conclude, therefore, that these things don't exist or even that they're unfindable.
If they're findable, they're a matter for science.
I told you what my intent was with my painting. So what if the creator, by way of a message of some kind, because a mind, an intelligence can actually communicate, what if the creator told us what his intention was?
Well, A, prove it, but 2, so what? I mean, I don't do everything my parents tell me to do. I don't always hold their values. I'm my own person. I grew up, so to speak, and here I am doing my own thing. I don't always have their values. So if your God exists, Why on earth should I bow to his, her, its, or their wishes? How does that make any sense? At what point do I get to be my own person? Well, I'll tell you what, even if your God exists, I'm going to do my own thing, because that's who I am. I don't have to bow to your God, and neither should anyone else.
So what am I proposing? Holy Bible. Word of God.
Oh, really? Once again, I have to say, prove it. Last I heard, that book was written by human hands. Sure, they claimed God guided their hands, but prove it. Show me that there's a God. Because if there isn't, then to buy the Bible, you have to buy bull.
And if you reject this book, the meaning of life, its quality, its purpose, you're not going to find it by way of science.
Maybe, maybe not. But I'll tell you this much, I'd rather use my own imagination than follow that book. Give me good reasons why I should follow that book instead of my own desires, my own preferences, my own purpose. And use a way that's not just a scare tactic. You know, like hell.
And so, when you're out there making fun of people for believing in God, and you say they're so unscientific, well, you should have already known that science can't detect these things.
Purpose? Intention? This has nothing to do with the existence of God. I mean, to have a purpose or an intention, God has to exist in the first place, something you have yet to show. And if you're going to show it, the only way to do so is using science. Because God is not an idea. God is not a purpose or an intention. Allegedly, according to your own book, God's a person, and he interacts with this world in physical ways. So either show us that, or admit you're making it up. One or the other. But show me the evidence, pal.
Science could detect God if he was there. Well, if God is outside the natural world, then using the natural world and looking in the natural world, you're not going to find the Creator in there any more than you're not going to find the creator of the painting in the painting itself.
Except that according to your own book, which I don't believe in, but let's just assume for a moment, according to your own book, that creator has touched his brush to the canvas after humans were around. Again, pillar of salt, virgin birth, world flood. We were there for the painting happening. So the deity should be detectable if he, she, it, or they does, in fact, exist. So again, provide the evidence.
Going back to the thing about human life and its value. Thunderfoot was asked in this situation between saving a dog and a human life, which would you rather save? And like I said, he couldn't detect the quality, the value of human life. And that's the problem when you approach all of life with a quantitative assessment, using only the scientific method.
Didn't sound to me like Thunderfoot was using the scientific method. Sounded to me like he was actually making an emotional argument. Sounds to me like what he was saying was, the neighbor's an asshole. I'm saving the dog. I like the dog. The dog's nice to me. The dog lets me pet him. We're friends. That neighbor, he steals my lawnmower. He parks so that I can't get into my driveway. He's a jerk. Why would I save him over a valued companion? Value's relative, not absolute, and humans are not necessarily better than other animals.
And so that is why you find people like Thunderfoot are absolutely robbed of value. They don't value human life in the way that someone like myself can, because I don't see the world strictly through the small lens of science.
Well, neither do most of the rest of us, honestly. I mean, God's existence is indeed a scientific question, for reasons I've already illuminated, but that doesn't mean that we look at everything through the lens of science. I mean, goodness knows, when I talk about my favorite movies, I'm not talking scientific. Those are purely emotional arguments. So, my world is not ruled entirely by science. I'm willing to bet most atheists would say theirs aren't either.
I recognize a much larger spectrum by which to know things.
No, you don't. You just think you do. Those are not things you know. Those are actually things you feel.
And one of the things I know is that there is a God, that there is a purpose, and that He loves us. And He loves us so much that He became a man and dwelt among us and died for us to save us.
You know this? How do you know this? What, you have a book that says so? Well, I have a book that says that Captain Kinnear Baxter flies through the galaxy solving crimes and every now and then doing scientific things. See, I have a book that says it too. But then, I wrote this book. So, maybe you can't trust it. Maybe you can't trust your book either. So, okay, a book isn't good enough. Prove to me that God exists. How can you do that? You can't do it with feelings. You've got to show me the effect this God has had on the world. You know, I mean, we are talking about a being here, not just a feeling, not just an impression. We're talking about someone who's actually interacted with the physical world outside of our own heads. So bloody well prove it.
And that shows me that there is value to my life, that there is a being who wanted me to exist, who wants me to exist forever, and has invited me through Jesus Christ to participate in eternal life.
Except, of course, you can't prove any of that actually happened. You can't prove that Jesus Christ was actually on the earth. You can't prove he was actually killed. You can't prove he was actually the Son of God. All you have is that book. So until you can prove it, there's no reason to believe it.
I'm pleading with you guys. Please try to hear what I'm saying. May God bless you.
Achoo. Until next time, fellow space travelers. Please take the time to rate this video. And hey, if you dig what I do, subscribe. You might also enjoy my webcomic, The Adventures of Kinnear Baxter. You'll find a link in the info bar. So, who wants cake? You have to rate first.